Good morning, everybody. I'm Councilmember Mary Shea, and we've come together today at Engine 16 to commemorate, remember the courage, the bravery, and the extraordinary selflessness of our firefighters and emergency service personnel. It was a horrific day, of course, and many of us have moments in our mind that we remember. There's one that I have, I think, that captures the bravery of our first responders. You may remember, as there were clouds of dust and fire and all sorts of chaos, people were literally running for their lives away from the towers. But at that very moment, there were firefighters rushing in to the towers, and for many, a certain death when they got there, because as we know, the buildings fell. Now, when a firefighter dies, there's a ringing of a bell in the station. And since we lost so many firefighters and emergency personnel, the bells rang ceaselessly. We will not forget the sacrifices, not in 20 years or 50 years or 100 years. We will never forget. Their deeds are written in the heavens and will live through the ages. And today is just one marker of our memory, one marker of our gratitude. I would now like to invite two members of our faith community to the podium, Rabbi Ambrose Lustig of the Washington Hebrew Congregation and Reverend Monica Rains of Christ United Methodist Church, to lead us in an opening prayer and a moment of silence.
Eternal God, we come this day to remember and to honor, and we ask on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, what have we done to change the tragic results of hate? How far have we come, God? How far do we have to go? Bereshit, Genesis teaches, and God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. And God created humanity in God's own image. In God's image, God created humanity. Male and female, God created them. All humanity was created from Adam for the sake of peace among humankind, so that no one should say to another, my ancestor is greater than yours. Imagine on this sun-filled day, we lived in a world where all of humanity understood that each of us was created in the divine image. How different things would be, how differently we would behave. There would be dignity in our difference. Race and gender, faith would not divide us, but would be celebrated. Bigotry and hatred would give way to tolerance and love. Benevolence would supplant the malevolence of xenophobia. We would not shun, put down, despise, exclude, denigrate, belittle, malign the other, but rather the other. Jew, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Buddhist, Baha'i, Zoroastrian would be our brother, our sister. The power, the truth of Genesis, that we were indeed created in the image of God, in the likeness of God. And so we can discern. We have free will. We're not helpless victims of fear or bigotry, but rather masters of our own destiny. We can choose how we see others. We can choose how we treat others. We can stand up when the sacred is violated, when fear or faith is used to teach hatred. Everything, says the Talmud, is in the hands of heaven except the awe of heaven itself. We don't create our circumstances in this world, but we do fashion our response. Against our will, notes the Talmud, we are born. Against our will, we are died. But the tale told between those brackets is not fated. Ability is inherited, but the self is formed. by choice and from effort and from faith. At each moment we make a moral choice. Our lives are the sum of our actions, tempered by our intention, limited by our endowments, ennobled by our faith. Let this gathering be our promise that we will choose love over hate, peace over violence, that we will endeavor to live as God's children, bringing compassion, tolerance, and building for our children and children's children a world better than ours. May we act as if we were worthy of being created in God's image. Hear our prayer, Eternal One. Give us clarity of conscience to see how far we have come, and give us strength and guidance to know how far we have yet to go. Bless our leaders, our cities, our first responders with the courage of their convictions. And let us say together, Amen.
But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. Will you join me for a moment of silence as we remember the fallen on this 9/11 Memorial Day? Amen.
Thank you. This year, on September 11th, we recognize and honor the service of our first responders. And today we do so in the presence of a piece of steel beam, which you can see at the front here. It's from the World Trade Center. And the World Trade Center steel beam will be installed outside of the Fire and EMS Training Academy as a permanent sign of sacrifice, heroism, and courage of our first responders on that day and every day. And so at this time, what I would ask is that members of the executive branch, the fire chief and the mayor, we're each going to take a wreath and lay it here near the beam. And the other wreath, oh, hold on now, that was for you guys. We need to have the council take the other wreath. But we like each other so that we could get together. Okay. And now we're going to ask Mayor Muriel Bowser to come forward and share her thoughts on this day.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Councilmember Che, Chairman Mendelsohn, Chairman Allen, and all the members of the Councilmember Bonds, and all the members of the council. I also want to recognize my predecessor, Anthony Williams, who was unable to be with us today, but who was leading our great city on September 11, 2001. On that Tuesday morning, Mayor Williams has recounted in his own words that not only was he the mayor, but he was the chief counselor for our city. And what I remember and what many Washingtonians remember on that extremely devastating day, that's what he was and what he was able to do, not only lead and get information out, but also acknowledge and support the weight of grief that was in our community that day. Our hearts were indeed heavy that morning, and to this day they remain heavy for the lives that we lost and the sacrifices that have been made since in war. On September 11th, 2001, we lost 11 Washingtonians. 3 of those lives lost were children, just 11 years old: Bernard Brown, Asia Cotton, and Rodney Dickens. Full of life and curiosity, Bernard, Asia, and Rodney left their families that morning to fly across the country, Chancellor, and visit a marine sanctuary off the coast of California. 20 years later, they would be getting ready to graduate from college. We continue to send our love and prayers to their families who that day experienced an unfathomable nightmare. By their sides were their teachers, Sarah Clark, James Debonair, and Hilda Taylor, and 2 members of the National Geographic team, Ann Judge and Joe Ferguson, who were leading the trip to California. On Flight 77 with them were 3 other Washingtonians: Paul Ambrose, David Charles Ball, Carolyn Kincaid. And inside the Pentagon that day, we lost Robert Millam, Carol Hammond, and Brenda Kegler, and Edna Stevens. We each have our own memories of that day, and while so much that we remember was the uncertainty, the confusion, and utter heartbreak, we also remember the bravery. We remember the bravery of thousands of first responders who rushed to the World Trade Center and to the Pentagon. We remember those D.C. firefighters who were here 20 years ago. No matter where they were or what they were doing, they dropped everything, reported to their engines, and raced to the Pentagon. The department launched a full-scale, all-hands-on-deck mobilization. Even instructors and command staff at the training academy stepped out of their roles and worked 18-hour days at the Pentagon. I know Chief Donnelly was one of them, who were off duty, who heard what happened, and rushed to work. And there were so many others who joined you that sad day. We remember the bravery of our D.C. Air National Guard. On the morning of September 11, 2001, that D.C. Air National Guard received a call from the United States Secret Service with instructions from the White House to protect the National Capital Region from any aircraft entering. We know that some of the crews didn't even have time to arm their aircrafts, but a tremendous display of courage and patriotism, our D.C. Air National Guard went into the sky, put their lives on the line to protect our capital. And so we thank them for their bravery on September 11th. We also thank the 8,000 D.C. veterans who since September 11 have served in the global war on terror. And I want to recognize Elliot Domingo, who leads the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs. We know this has been a difficult month for many veterans who served in Afghanistan, and Elliot and his team have been reaching out to our community, making sure people know how to get connected to support and recognize the unique trauma of this moment on our service members. And finally, we remember the bravery, sacrifice, and heroism of the passengers of United Flight 93. We know that Flight 93 was headed to Washington, D.C., and so we are certain that the 40 passengers and crew members aboard that flight saved our city and our nation from even a darker day in history. They were among the nearly 3,000 people who died as a result of the attacks that day. And so today, as we receive this piece of the World Trade Center and we reflect on everything that happened since September 11, we honor all those lives. We remember them as sons and daughters, husbands and wives, students, civil servants, friends, beloved co-workers, and as some of the bravest first responders in our nation's history. We speak often in D.C. about the honor and responsibility it is to host the federal government, but it's not always obvious to those outside of D.C. what that responsibility looks like. But it means that all of our public safety agencies stand ready to assist our federal partners whenever and wherever needed. It means that since 9/11, we spent more than $1 billion to anticipate and prepare for emergency situations that require regional coordination and response. And today we are a city and a region that is more prepared, more resilient, and has more resources ready to address foreign and domestic threats. And to host the federal government also means that when the eyes of the world are on our nation's capital, whether during tragedy, during inaugurations, First Amendment demonstrations, January 6th, no matter what is happening, our public safety teams are working around the clock and hand in hand with our federal and regional partners to protect D.C. residents, to protect visitors, to protect our national leaders, and to protect our nation's democracy. On this day, 20 years later, I want to continue to recognize the bravery of D.C. Fire and EMS, the Metropolitan Police Department, to recognize all of our first responders and all of us who came together to wrap our arms around those who lost loved ones and those who experienced the trauma of that day. Chief Donnelly, will you join me to receive this proclamation as I proclaim today the 20th anniversary, a day of remembrance? Please accept this on behalf of all the members of DC Fire and EMS. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much, Mayor. We will now hear from the chairman of the District of Columbia Council, Chairman Phil Mendelsohn.
Thank you, Councilmember Che. And I want to acknowledge other members of the council who are here. In addition to Councilmember Che, who's serving as the Master of Ceremonies, the Chair of our Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, Charles Allen, at-large Councilmember Anita Bonds. I also want to acknowledge the members of Fire and Emergency Medical Services Department who are standing in front of all of us. And thank you, and thank all of the members of the department. When I think back 20 years ago, I remember a horrific day, and I think it was horrific for all of us. If we think about it for a moment, first of all, it was unbelievable what we saw in the morning with the news, the video on TV of those Twin Towers, seeing them on fire and knowing after the first one collapsed that the second one was going to collapse, and that it was just inevitable that people, hundreds of people, turned out to be thousands of people would die. It was horrific. But it was also horrific in that we were all afraid. We were afraid here in Washington, D.C., and we were afraid across the country. We didn't know what the next target would be. I remember that Secret Service an MPD closed off blocks and blocks and blocks around the White House, afraid that there would be another plane that would be attacking or some other incident. And for days, if not weeks, we were afraid that there were going to be other targets here in Washington or in other cities. The airspace, not just around Washington, but around the country, was closed to commercial traffic. And we were afraid of our own citizens, some of them, particularly those of Muslim faith. It was really a horrible time, and there was a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And what do we do to protect ourselves, and what do we do to be sure it doesn't happen again? But we're not here today because we want to celebrate the horrors of it. We're really here today because we want to reflect on that occasion, and in particular, to show our appreciation for the first responders, not only the first responders who responded that day and those who gave their lives, but the first responders who are on duty today, who are at risk. We don't know if there'll ever be another incident like that. We certainly hope not, or some other incident of lesser magnitude. And there is a risk, and so we want to thank and celebrate our first responders, but also to remember the victims, those who gave their lives without meaning to, without wanting to, for no reason, giving their lives. And then one other point I think is important to celebrate, and that is that in those days, 20 years ago, there was unity. Folks came together to help each other, and also to reach out to those who were victims and the families of those victims. And those are all principles that are worth remembering. Thank you.
The Council of the District of Columbia has passed a resolution to acknowledge the bravery, courage, and sacrifice of our firefighters and emergency personnel, and I'd like to take a moment to read it to you. To honor the district's Fire and Emergency Medical Services Department for its dedication and protection of the citizens and visitors of Washington, D.C., for their valiant and courageous service to the metropolitan area after the attacks of September 11, 2001. Whereas, on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of September 11, 2001, and the terrorist attacks that took place that day, the Council of the District of Columbia honors the memory and nearly 3,000 people who perished in the attack, including 12 victims from the district. Whereas an exceptionally courageous force of first responders, including more than 100,000 firefighters, paramedics, rescue and recovery workers, and police officers across the country, risked their lives that day to save the lives of others. Whereas the brave District Fire and EMS Department, which along with the Arlington County Fire Department and other local fire agencies, helped with the Pentagon rescue and recovery efforts on September 11, 2001. Whereas nationally, thousands of first responders have suffered adverse and emotional effects in the 20 years since 2001. And even now are at significantly greater risk for developing occupational cancers due to their exposure to chemicals and debris from the attacks. Whereas the men and women who serve as first responders in the District of Columbia carry out the extraordinary responsibility of protecting not only district residents, but all who visit here, all who work here, and have always done so with tremendous dedication. Whereas the men and women of the district's emergency services have fulfilled every duty to the district in an honorable, courageous, and timely fashion, and have demonstrated immense compassion for those who have suffered unforeseeable tragedies while routinely considering the safety and well-being of others before their own. And whereas it is fully right and just to honor the memory of those who lost their lives in the terrorist attacks 2 decades ago, and it is equally compelling to observe and pay our respects to the first responders of the district and their bravery and selflessness in the face of extraordinarily trying circumstances, resolved by the Council of the District of Columbia that this resolution may be cited as the September 11th Emergency First Responders Remembrance and Recognition Resolution of 2021. And Chief, I will present this on behalf of the council, but not today. We had a little glitch in the preparation of the resolution, but I will get it to you. And at this time, I'd like to please invite up to the podium Councilmember Charles Allen for some remarks.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Che, Madam Mayor, and to your team, Mr. Chairman, my colleague, Ms. Bonds. Thank you all very much for making time out to be here on this very important day. And I appreciate hearing all of your comments as well. I've been sitting in this chair looking at this piece, and emblazoned on it are the words "never forget." And yesterday, I had the honor of joining Chief Donnelly and his leadership team as the Cadet Class 23 of the D.C. Fire and EMS Department graduated. And the Chief and I were talking about this, and we believe, and we asked for a show of hands, so I think it's verified now, it's the first class that's graduated from our training academy that was born after September 11th. And that feels like a bit of a milestone as well. And I know as I've talked with the men and women serving in fire and EMS, both here and other places, they frequently talked about that while 9/11 certainly for many people is such an important event, it's not the only defining aspect of the men and women that serve. And I think that that's one of the things when I look at the words "never forget," that when we think about what it means, having this at the training academy will be very important for the men and women coming to serve, that they do never forget what came before them. And I also want to acknowledge Chief Benedict, thank you for being here, and to the men and women serving with our Metropolitan Police Department who are full partners with the men and women in our fire department. Thank you for that partnership. I think that those words mean something to everybody who reads them perhaps in a slightly different way. And as someone who reads them myself, and I think both the mayor and the chairman alluded to this as well, I hope that we'll also not forget the possibility that came out of that tragedy. There was a moment, and there still can be, where we're able to find ways to come together, solve shared problems, not let differences define us, but really be able to think about what is possible and how much more we can do together. And I think it's possible in our hearts. I think it's possible in our eyes. I think it's something that we all can do. And for me, that's part of what I take away from this day. It's something that we shouldn't forget on the 19th anniversary or the 21st anniversary, but certainly as we mark this important milestone, that we should never forget the sacrifices that were made, but also the possibilities that can come out of such an incredible tragedy, and that frankly all of us in our different roles of leadership and responsibility have and can bear. So to the men and women standing behind me, thank you very much for your service on that day as well as every day, and we are very grateful for the hard work and sacrifices that you make. Thank you very much.
As Councilmember Allen pointed out, we're grateful to our first responders, not just on the occasion of 9/11, but every single day. We're indebted to them, and I would like to acknowledge that that debt is growing greater and greater, because there's no day that goes by that they're not available to us as a security blanket. So I'd like to now invite Chief Donnelly, who leads our fire department, fire and EMS department, to come forward to give remarks. And I owe you a resolution.
We'll get it. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Mayor, thank you for your support of the department and of all first responders. The investments and the support you give us has made our community safer. To the council, to the council chair, to chairman, to Councilmember Allen in particular, the work and support you give us, the feedback you give us makes us better, and we certainly appreciate that. It helps us be part of the community. It's hard going after everybody. The themes all week long, right? The themes are very similar And the speech you sit down and you write at the beginning of it ends up being a repeat of people. So we're going to deviate a little bit. First, what I'd like to tell you about the people standing behind me is they really are heroes. But if you were to press them on what they are, they'd tell you they were just doing their job. And they tell you that about 9/11. They tell you about that, about January 6th, or any of the other situations you go on. But the reality is we all know different. So 9/11 was a scary day, but it was also the end of, it marks a really important change in the fire service across our nation, and probably for all first responders. It was the end of an innocence, in a sense. Before that day, I knew what I was doing as a firefighter. I was helping people. I was going into people's houses when they were sick, and I was running into burning buildings. I knew what the risks were. After 9/11, there was a whole bunch of risks that the fire departments needed to learn about. And I think that's what Never Forget is. So I'd like to talk about Never Forget in terms of what changed. And it really isn't only what changed for the 408 D.C. fire and EMS personnel that responded to the Pentagon that day. It's what changed for our industry and what changed for our department. What do we tell that new generation? That piece is going at the training academy from New York. We're going to give them not only the lessons of bravery, of just doing your job. We're going to teach them about building construction, more about building construction. We're going to teach them about cancer. We have many new protective pieces of equipment that help us stay safe from cancer as a result of 9/11. We're going to talk about responder mental health, because responder mental health came to the forefront after 9/11. What do we tell them about Flight 93? We tell them that they can solve problems. And think about this for a minute. In 45 minutes, American citizens, with just a little bit of information, defeated hijackers. Yes, at their cost of their life, but the hijackers didn't win. And that's an important piece for all of us to learn. From the Pentagon, it highlighted our need for regional response. We were already doing amazing things in this region, but after that, we accelerated those. The mayor talked about over $1 billion in spending. That's the regional efforts to do that are making us all safer. On January 6th, when we needed help, we just called our partners. We got ambulances here to help. Intelligence sharing. Today, well, I'll tell you, on 9/11, I had no idea who Al Qaeda was. I didn't know who Osama bin Laden was. I didn't know who the Taliban was. But they certainly kicked our butt that day, right? On January 6th, we knew who was here, and that was because we were sharing intelligence. We were able to prepare for it. And that goes on every day. Our fire chiefs on the scene, our firefighters talk to police officers all the time. They share information as we plan for the upcoming events next weekend. We know it. We know what we know. That's an important change that results in 9/11. So those are the things that we take away. So this piece of steel is that commemoration for us. It'll be at our training academy, and it'll be our lesson point, not only for the new people that come in, but for our people every time they go down there to review what it is that they need to do every day. So thank you for having us all today. Ms. Che.
Earlier, you may remember that Mayor Bowser pointed out that part of the tragedy, the heartbreaking tragedy of 9/11 here in the District of Columbia, was the loss of life of some of our young students. So now I'd like to please call up Chancellor Farabee to provide some remarks.
Good morning. Thank you, Councilmember Che. Thank you, Mayor Bowser, Chairman Mendelsohn, other members of the council, for the opportunity to serve our city, but also to remember members of the DC Public Schools family. It is truly an honor to serve in this capacity in our great city. But as we think about this day and remembering September 11, 2001, it makes me recall on my day as an elementary school principal, leading 600 students in a school serving students pre-K through 5th grade. Like any other day, I led us through our morning announcements, helping our classrooms remove items from breakfast in the morning, and preparing to line up our 3rd graders as they were going on their field trip to the zoo. As we were in the process, we began to get notification of what was happening on this tragic day. We had to make decisions about, do we continue with the field trip or not? How quickly do we execute our lockdown procedures? Do we even show the young people in the building the video footage of what was happening in our nation? As I reflect on that day, my role and responsibility as a principal, it's just a reminder of all the other public servants who stepped up and responded. I'm extremely grateful. We're reminded each time we celebrate these types of moments of our service members of how fortunate we are to have first responders that we have in the district and across our nation. But I'm also reminded that I wasn't leading DC Public Schools at that time, and we had members of our DCPS community on another field trip. As the mayor mentioned earlier, we had members of our community via students, via staff members on their way to California as a part of another field trip. I want to lift up as a part of this remembrance our partnership with National Geographic, who hand-selected 3 students and staff members to participate in this field trip. We recognized them. We had 3 students that we lost that will be forever part of the DC Public Schools families. And I think about specifically some of those students. We had Asia Cotton, who was actually new to DCPS. This was her first year in the district. She was a middle school student at Bacchus. We had 3 staff members. I think about a staff member, James Debonair. He was a 5th grade teacher at Ketchum Elementary School. He was known for being the first person in the building and the last person to leave. And I could go on and on about those 6 members of our community, but most importantly, they will be forever part of DC Public Schools as we remember this horrific day. I also again want to recognize those 2 members of National Geographic that will also accompany our members of DCPS, and the ability to share that type of experience with our students and our families. It's been said many times, but I will say it again. We must never forget this experience, what it's taught us, but how it's allowed us to be greater as a community and as a nation. I thank you.
Before proceeding, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Major General McCandless, our interim head of the National Guard. Could you say hi? When we face our greatest crises, and we're in the midst of them, among the faces that we see are our first responders. Their presence acts as the first reassurance that help has arrived. So to DC's bravest, we thank you. We thank you. We don't get to say that often enough, but we should every day. And to the men and women who served on that fateful day 20 years ago, to those who have been inspired by their service, in spite of the dangers and the risks, to become emergency responders, we thank you as well, and we appreciate you today and every day. And now we are going to move to our closing prayer. So I would like to invite to the podium Imam Jahari Abdul Malik Seal of the Muslim Society of Washington to provide that closing prayer.
Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I greet you in the greeting words of peace. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. The Arabic language, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As we prepare to depart from this place, O God, let us reaffirm our faith in divine love, in divine courage, and in divine hope. Empower us to continue to confront the challenges that are before us. We pray this morning that you will give us the courage of a firefighter. Give us the courage to rush into the fires of hatred and bigotry, violence, poverty, disease, and injustice. Not only in our world and in our nation, but in our city, the District of Columbia, and a capital of our world. Oh God, we pray that those who are rapping, preaching, and perpetrating violence in our city, let them take note that we will struggle together. We will rush into the places of difficulty, empowered by your will, that we will say, hush to violence, hush to hatred, hush to bigotry, and that we will say together, as James Weldon Johnson wrote, stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, not with our weary feet, come to the place where our fathers had sighed. We have come over a way with tears that has been watered. We have come treading the path through the blood and the slaughter, out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by their might led us into the light, keep us forever on this path, we pray. Brothers and sisters, we ask God Almighty to continue to keep us sober. Let us never forget that we are one people, one nation, one world, and give us the courage of a firefighter, that we might rush into the places that are dark and burning to bring our light, our love, and our hope. May God bless all of the firefighters, EMS, those people who continue to put their lives in the line as an example for all of us, that we might be blessed. Alhamdulillah, God be praised, that we may forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. If you agree with me in your own way, say, Ameen.
Thank you very much for that wonderful prayer. And that concludes our ceremony today. So thank you all who have joined us. We greatly appreciate it. And again, a special thanks to all of you who protect us every day. Thank you.